Hi everyone, welcome back to Nick's Diecast. In today's video, I'll be giving you various tips on both purchasing and owning upper end or higher end model cars. Now this video will mostly pertain to 1/18 scale higher end models, but I believe many of the tips that I'll be sharing can be considered for higher end models of all different scales. So I'll be kind of talking about how you would go about buying a higher end model and kind of share what my thought process is when I buy my higher end models, which I don't have a whole lot of. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get into later. And then I'll also be talking about how to maintain these types of models once you have them and what you can do to preserve them in the long run in your collection. Now, in terms of what I define an upper end model or a higher end model to be, I consider any model to be a higher end model if it's one above maybe 75 US dollars in price, and two has numerous features and details that you would not see on a lower end model, like a Maisto, Welly, or Solido, or Paragon model. And these details would include features such as carpeting, extremely well detailed paintwork, metal wheels, metal bases, side windows, extremely fine detailing on portions of the model, such as the interior and the engines, and other small details such as fabric seat belts and other things like that. Now, not every higher end model will have every feature that I mentioned, but in most cases, they do have all of these features that I mentioned. And also models that are just made by certain brands in general, such as the Auto Art brand or Kyosho or Norev, just to name several. These three models that you see right here are made by various manufacturers. This one is made by Welly GT Autos, and it was actually the first higher end model that I purchased. This was back in 2015 when this model was actually still out. And at that time, this model was actually only about $60, $65 or so. And that was, of course, back in 2015. Today, as far as I know, you can't really buy any higher end 1/18 scale model new for anything below 75 US dollars. There are certainly some lower end brands that kind of border on the upper end side, such as Welly, in terms of like their regular, like non GT autos models. Solido, although they're kind of half opening, half sealed models, but their details are quite good. And some additional brands as well, but they're considered mostly to be on lower end brands. The Maisto and Paragon brands come to mind as well for lower end brands. But for higher end brands, like those few that I did mention, their models mostly start at least 150 US dollars. And if you go for certain models, such as certain resin models, which are made in very limited numbers and have exquisite levels of detailing, even when you compare them to models such as these, none of these were above $175 in terms of price before shipping and everything. And even after that was all said and done, neither of these two models here cost above $190 in the end. And these two models, they don't actually list who the manufacturer is, but these are dealer edition models. And oftentimes you don't really see the model manufacturer name on those. But all of these are fully opening die-cast models. They are not made of composite, and they are not resin models. So we're going to kind of get into first the different types of higher end models that you'll encounter, at least as far as 1/18 scale models go. And I kind of said all three of those categories just now. You, of course, have fully opening die-cast, which is what these three models here are. And they tend to be on the cheaper end of higher end models, if that makes sense. You can find fully opening die-cast higher end models for usually below 250 US dollars, depending on which brand you're getting, what the model is, and depending on how many units of that particular model have been built. These three here, I would say, are semi-met, or were, because I don't know if these two are being made. This one is definitely not being made anymore. But These were made in at least 5,000 units or so. A lot of times when you get to certain resin brands such as BBR and the likes of them, their models are made sometimes in as low as 100 units, or even less than that sometimes. And as a result, they're tremendously expensive compared to a lot of fully opening die-cast models of the upper end range, which a lot of times, once again, you can find for under 200 US dollars. And that's still very pricey, especially if you're a more budget-minded model car collector or are new to the hobby in general and maybe want to consider getting yourself a higher end die-cast model or just a higher end model in general. But in addition to the fully opening die-cast models, you also have what are called composite models. And composite models are actually made out of plastic material. I think it's called ABS plastic rather than metal or die-cast metal. And then in addition to composite models, you also have resin models, which are the most accurately molded in terms of the castings themselves out of the three different types of models that I mentioned. Now, the resin models that come to mind are quite on the expensive side, even when compared to already expensive higher end models. Resin models oftentimes are sold for above 400 US dollars, depending on the model brand and what the model itself is. Composite models usually do have the same opening features that fully opening die-cast models have, although again, they're made out of plastic as opposed to die-cast metal. But that being said, composite models are also molded more accurately in a lot of cases to die-cast models. And that also being said, die-cast models of the higher end range are oftentimes accurately molded as well. So it really all comes down to which material is your preference. Die-cast models are, of course, going to be on the heavier side and more durable, if that's more of your concern. But if you're into more kind of extremely fine detailing in terms of how a casting is actually shaped, then composite or resin models might be of consideration for you. It does get very confusing in terms of what's what, but for the most part, if you're looking into getting a higher end model, fully opening die-cast models, I think, are the best bang for your buck. And a lot of times, if you're considering buying a higher end model, you're not really thinking about things like that. But I think there's just a wider variety out there in general in terms of upper end models when you look at what's out there in terms of upper end fully opening die-cast models. So there's other, I think, videos and articles online that kind of lay out those three different types of models better than I just did, but that's sort of just the gist of what those three types of upper end model materials are. So first I'll talk about how you go about buying a higher end model. Let's say that there's a model either that you either want to get a model of a car that you really love in real life, or you see a picture of a model of upper end nature online that you are very interested in getting. But you're not sure if you want to pull the trigger on the purchase due to its high price. There's a few things that you can do before you actually go about buying a model that I recommend that you do. So the first thing to do is to see if there are any other competing brands that make that same model that are out there. And one model that comes to mind for me is this Lexus LC500H made by Almost Real Models. Now, when I wanted to get a 1/18 scale model of the Lexus LC series of my own, at the time, there were three different brands that were making 1/18 scale models. All of them were higher end brands. We had the Kyosho version, which I believe was a sealed die-cast model. That's where things get confusing too, with resin versus composite versus die-cast, because resin models are always sealed, but die-cast models tend to mostly be fully opening, although sometimes you will find sealed die-cast models. And composite models tend to be either fully opening, partially opening, or sealed. But at least as far as the Lexus LC Series Coupe went, there was this model, which is fully opening die-cast, and was on the lower end in terms of cost among the three different models that I was looking at. There was the Kyosho version, which was also die-cast, but that model was sealed, and it was a right-hand drive version. And then we had the auto art version, which was composite and came in either the right-hand drive or the left-hand drive configuration. So once I found out that there were three different models that were available of this particular car that I wanted a 1/18 scale model of, I looked at different photos online and different video reviews and just different, close-up pictures and everything in general of all three models. I also compared the prices and the different colors that the models came in. So of course I first narrowed it down by whether or not I wanted the right-hand drive or the left-hand drive version, if that is something that you need to consider for a certain model that you want. And then I went ahead and I narrowed it down based off the color I wanted. So in the end, I wanted either a bright yellow or this really awesome blue version of the car. And in addition to that, I also compared the prices of the different brands. This Almost Rio, although it is not made of composite, it's made of really heavy, fully opening die cast. It does include a plethora of different features and details that I think made it a great deal for the $175 that I paid for it before shipping and everything. And this model I did buy off of eBay, which is a good site, I think, to purchase higher end models from. And also, sellers tend to post a lot of very close up photos of these cars on there too. And of course, there are various independent diecast model sites out there too, such as Diecast Model Wholesale and Diecast Direct, just to name two. So that's also something that you'll have to look into, is which site do you want to buy it from and who has the best price. And the same goes for this BMW 5 Series by Welly. At the time, there were also versions of the F10 Generation 5 Series made by Norev and Kyosho as well. So I compared all three in terms of their colors, overall details, and prices before I bought the Welly version. And this is very crucial to do because you don't want to just buy the first higher end model of a particular car that you see. Because that one might be the least detailed of which however many different model manufacturers are out there that make said car. Now the price difference was not really all that big, but at the time I was buying this, I was still a kid in school and I was only working part-time. So I had to that was the other thing that I had to consider at that time, was it was the first upper end model that I was buying. So I really wanted to compare the different models that were out there of this car and see, who had the best details for the money. And in addition to looking at pictures of all three models, I also looked at video reviews of all three models as well. This was during a time, almost a decade ago now, where there were a fair bit of reviews on YouTube of diecast models, but now they are, I think, far more prominent than they were at that time. And of course, I do have reviews up of all three of these particular models. So that's the other thing that you want to do, is especially for higher end diecast models, I highly recommend looking at video reviews as opposed to just pictures. Pictures do tell quite a lot about models, and especially when you go on sites such as Diecast Model Wholesale, who does list a lot of higher end 1/18 scale models as part of their inventory, I guess we'll say. They do take quite detailed shots of the models that they list, and their pictures are quite good. Carmodel.com is another site where I think has great photos of models up close, where you can really see all the different details and features that they have. But with video reviews, you're of course seeing the model in motion, I guess we'll say, where, the reviewer's kind of, picking it up and taking a look at it, showing you the various features instead of just, having static pictures. You get to see the features being opened and closed and, just worked with. And of course, the reviewer will tell you their opinion or thoughts on the model. And then you can really get an idea of whether or not you would then want to buy that particular model. Something else I recommend doing is if you see a higher end model and you really want to get it, like you've seen it on your computer screen, or you've seen it maybe in person, and you think, wow, this is really amazing, I want to get it right now, I would step back for just a little bit. Because unlike lower end models where you can kind of impulsively buy it, and it won't be a big deal if, let's say, it turns out to be not what you expected, or you lose interest in it within a few weeks. You can't really do that with an upper end model because when you do, then you're out at least $200 a lot of times. And especially if you do this with a resin model, which are tremendously pricey once again compared to fully opening die cast, you're out at least $400. So when you see a model online or a new release and it's a higher end model that costs a lot of money, hold off just a few days. And then if you keep thinking about it, if it's sometimes it is all you end up thinking about, and once you've explored either through photos online or through video reviews the different details that the model has, then you can go about buying it. Now, once you have bought the higher end model that you were looking at, first off, congratulations, you now have it. But now you have to maintain it so it stays nice for many years to come, whether you plan on keeping it for yourself for life or whether you plan on maybe giving it to somebody else or even selling it in the future. Upper end models, I would say, need some additional care compared to lower end models in terms of just cleaning them and maintaining them in general. So the first thing you want to do is, if you have them up on the shelf, is to keep them generally dust free. You don't have to dust them necessarily every single day, but I would say dust them at least every 2 or 3 days or so. And you must always dust them with a microfiber cloth. Don't ever use like a paper towel or anything that's, rough that may scratch the paint. You almost have to treat these like they're real cars in a way, because the same goes for real cars in terms of their paintwork as well. You want to use like a soft cloth, like a lint-free or microfiber cloth in order to clean them. And you can also use very soft brushes to clean out the windshield reservoirs and other kind of nooks and crannies on these models. Anything that will not scratch the paint or scratch any part of the model, basically. And always make sure that when you do have them out on your shelves, to keep them away from direct sunlight and to keep them away from a shelf or a place where they may get, bumped into or knocked over. Pretty, common sense stuff like that. And of course, you do want to give them a thorough cleaning before you store them for a long period. That way they're nice and clean when you take them out of their boxes. And then when you do store these models, make sure that they're fully secure in their boxes. A lot of these higher end models do come in styrofoam encasings, I guess we'll say, which you then slide inside their protective boxes. Make sure that these are, of course, fully closed up. And of course, for any of these models that came screwed on plastic bases, make sure that they are fully screwed back onto the plastic bases before you put the base and the model back in its box. Of course, when you have the model stored, you want them to be just as protected as when you have them out for other people to see, if not more protected, because you're not actually looking at the models when they are stored. And of course, these tips do apply to smaller scale models as well. So yeah, those are just my tips on how you would go about buying and maintaining upper end or higher end models. And really it all comes down to knowing what you want to buy and making sure that you compare the different choices that are out there in terms of a model of a certain car that you would like to get for your collection. And of course that comes with looking at reviews and comparing pictures of these models online. And then once you have the models, of course, you just want to be able to maintain them so that way they stay, nice for many years to come. And that way you can enjoy them as the models that they are. So feel free to comment down below with your thoughts on the video here, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And I hope this was helpful to all of you who watched. Thanks for watching.